Good evening and welcome to Torah Studies. Today, this week, we begin the new book, the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And the topic of discussion today is leadership. What makes a good leader? I know today we have crisis in leadership in today's day and age. All types of leadership, political leadership. And so the question is, what makes a good leader? So that's one question. What are the qualities of a good leader? Another question is also, how should leaders assume the leadership? Should the people be involved, or should it be appointed position? This also is a crisis in many areas today. And finally, also the question is, the leadership, should the leader be concerned with his constituents mainly, or is it or should it be also concerned about the general good of the country and so on, or the good of the nation? So we will find answers what the Torah says about this from the story of this week's portion that talks about the 12 leaders of the Jewish tribes. So we know the Jewish people had the leadership of the nation. Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt. His brother Aaron was the high priest. But in addition, there was also leaders that each tribe had their own leader that led their tribe. And in this week's Torah portion, there is a census that is taking place. God instructed Moses to take a census of the Jewish people and to count also each tribe individually, and instructed Moses that the leaders of the tribes, they should take part of it. Now, what is interesting is the Torah, we mentioned a number of times that the Torah is not always in a chronological order. So things that are mentioned later on in the portion, in the Torah, could be things that happened before. So indeed, we find later on in the Torah, in this Chumash, we find about the inauguration of the temple. And that took place in the month of Nisan. And what we are reading today about the census actually took place a month later. And that raises some questions, because over there, by the inauguration of the temple that took place a month earlier, the Torah already mentions the names of the leaders, and yet here the Torah mentions again the names. So we're going to get to it, and from each of these questions, we're going to come to better understandings in what is the quality of a leader, and what leadership is all about, and how this is connected with the counting of the Jewish people represents seeing the good of each and every individual Jew. Hashem, it says, because of out of the love that Hashem has, He counts the Jewish people. So let's begin by reading in the Torah about the instructions that Hashem says to take the census to count the Jewish people. Here says the Torah, Se'uz roish kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. Hashem instructs Moses, take the sum of the entire congregation of the children of Israel, and then he says, Ve'itchem, and with you there shall be one man from each tribe, the one who is head of his father's house. And then it goes on to say that these people were summoned by the nation, the princes of their paternal tribes. So the question that we asked, why? The Torah goes on then to say these are the people, and it mentions the names, the tribe of each tribe, what are the names of the leaders. So the question is, why? Why does the Torah mention here? Again, the names of the leaders, as we said, just a month earlier, when we recounted, when the people brought the inaugurations, the offering in the temple, in the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, all the names of the tribes were mentioned already. And we know that the Torah is very economical with words. Every word is very counted. Every word in the Torah is precise. There's no extra words in the Torah. So why mention the names again? Could say Moses took the princes of Israel. So to answer this, first we'll talk about how were these leaders chosen. The leaders of the 12 tribes, how were they chosen? So indeed we find Hashem said to Moshe to pick leaders, but yet it happened to be that the leaders were chosen by the people themselves. As Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz explains, he says, God instructed Moses, and you should choose teachers and judges. Nevertheless, Moses did not select the princes, though that would have been appropriate. But this was so the people would not say, how will these leaders benefit us? They will certainly side with Moses on every matter. Thus, the Torah describes them as summoned by the nation. That's why it says, that they were summoned by the nations. So, of course, these words in the Torah, summoned by the nations, has different interpretations, but this is the way Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz explains this, that they were summoned by the nations, that for the nation chose them, because the nation were the ones who choose these people. And indeed, we do find in the Talmud, it says that the people that are appointed upon the nation, upon the community, they should be chosen. This is a established thing. We're not talking about the judges. The judges was something that Moses chose, but the people who are appointed as leaders, they should be chosen. And why is it necessary? They need to select homegrown leaders that can rule with integrity. Places a huge burden on the leaders. When you choose people, it's a burden. On the one hand, you want to have a leader with integrity, but yet when you choose people, when you choose a leader, are chosen from the people. So obviously, he has some feelings towards his people, towards his family, towards his friend. And to be with such integrity, to not to play any nepotism and not to play any to be a leader with integrity, that takes a lot in a leader. And indeed, the people that the Jewish people chose, those leaders were indeed qualified. They were indeed worthy people. As the Kli Yakar says in the passage states, if the passage states 1 man for each tribe, is it not redundant to tell us that each was head of his father's house? So it says the Kli Yakar, Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim of Lunchitz, he says as follows. He says, this tells us that the princes did not extend preferential treatment to their tribesmen. Rather, they ruled over them as they would over any other tribe. And it says, moreover, they were not just firm with distant tribe members who they barely knew, but also with their father's household, their closest relatives. So even with their closest relatives, those leaders made sure that they play no preferential treatment to nobody. So they were leading in a proper way. And indeed, our sages tell us that Hashem, God, approved the leaders, the 12 leaders of the tribes. God approved this. Where do we see? Where do we see that God approved the 12 leaders? Says the Netziv of Volozhin says, he says, the tribes have already chosen the leaders. And at this point, God endorsed their choices and ratified the leaders as divine appointees. This tells us that the leaders were not chosen solely on account of their wealth and leadership qualities. They were also chosen for the brilliant Torah scholarship and for the fear of heaven. Those leaders were people who feared Hashem. They feared heaven. They were worthy of standing before God at the helm of their respective tribes. And if we hear about the background of these leaders, we can understand why they were chosen. So some of you may know, these leaders of the 12 tribes, they had leadership roles even while back when they were in Egypt under the slavery. When they were slaves in Egypt, the Egyptians, they chose foremen for the Jewish slaves. And these foremen, they were responsible to make sure that everything goes right, that the quota, whatever they're supposed to bring, is brought the right amount, whatever they have to build, whatever the bricks that they have to provide. And the leaders, they were responsible to make sure that this happens. And what happened when the decrees got harsher and the Jews were not able to provide the amount? Who was punished? The leaders were punished. They were beaten, but they did not put the pressure on the Jews. They took the beatings and they took the sufferings. and they protected the people. They protected the Jewish people. So because of that, this is why the Jews, they chose those people to be their leaders of their tribes. As we see in the next text, Rashi says, it says, they were the Jewish overseers in Egypt who were beaten for the sake of the Jewish slaves that they oversaw. So this is the true leader. A true leader is one who takes responsibility. A true leader is one who doesn't play favoritism. The princes were wealthy and powerful, but he also excelled in Torah study and fear of heaven. They were the paragons of virtue, powerful but not arrogant, wealthy but not aloof. There's a story of a rabbi before Pesach in a little town in Russia. When the day before Pesach, someone is knocking on the door, and a Jew walks in and says, "Rabbi, I have a question. Am I allowed to have the Seder night and have the 4 cups of milk instead of wine?" So the rabbi turned to his wife and he says, "Could you go please get me 5 ruble?" And she gave him 5 ruble and he gave it to him and says, "Here, take, that's for you." And he went home and he left. So after he left, the wife asked the rabbi, "Why did you give him 5 rubles? He was asking if he obviously didn't have wine, but wine you can buy with 1 ruble." And he said to her, if he comes and asking a question about making 4 cups instead of wine of milk, obviously he doesn't have money for the meat or for the other things. So he gave him, so he should have. This is a leader. Leadership, when you're sensitive for the needs of the people. When you ask, when you hear a question, you can see what else. You look deeper. What else is bothering the person? What else does he need? That's a true leader. And so these people were already chosen as leaders in Egypt before they even left. And then here it comes. They were the ones who brought the offerings on behalf of their tribes. And now here, when it comes to count the Jewish people, Hashem mentions them again. Hashem mentions them again, and that is to show that God basically is saying, I approve of their leadership. These people are indeed qualified to be the leaders. But yet the question remains, and that is, we see that the names is mentioned again. I can understand if Hashem says, okay, these leaders that we know already their names, I approve of them. Let their leaders come and count the Jewish people. But why mention their names again? As the Torah specifies, these are the names, the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Reuven, Shimon, each one mentions the names. And the Torah spends 10 verses in mentioning the names again. Not only that, but in the Torah itself, we find, it says, the Torah specifies that Moses and Aaron took the people that were mentioned by name. What is it about the name? As we see in the next text, Va'ikach Moshe ve'Aaron eser anashim ha'ele asher nikvu b'shemot. Moses and Aaron took these men who were indicated by names. There is something special about the names. So to understand why naming the princes somehow enabled Moshe Rabbeinu to use their help with the census, we have to understand they assisted in the counting in the census. What was their part? What were they doing? The tribes. So as we mentioned, that this counting, unlike other countings, this counting was not just a counting of the collective census of the collective Jewish nation, but it was a census of each particular tribe. And then, as a result, also, they counted the total of the entire Jewish people. But it was something about each particular tribe, and these leaders, their job was to make sure that indeed those people who claim to be belonging to their tribe are indeed part of their tribe. As we see here in the next text from this portion from the Torah, the entire nation assembled on the first day of the second month. First day of the second month. Here the Torah says exactly what the date that it was. That's how we know that this was after the dedication of the temple, because that took place in the first month. So this is the first day of the second month, and declared their pedigree according to their families and according to their fathers' houses. So that's what the people did. What did they do? It says they brought the records of their pedigrees and witnesses of their birth claims, so that each could trace their genealogy to a tribe. So each one, they all had the records, the books, and each one brought the proofs that they really belong to their tribe. And the leaders of the tribes were supposed to approve it. And the tribal princes must be at your side, because each is the head of his father's home. And the pedigree of the tribesmen will be familiar to them. But this really is also raises a question. Could they really know, at that time, the tribes, each tribe, were talking about tens of thousands of people. So they really can tell exactly all these tens of thousands of people, who they were, and also how did the Jewish people have the records? They were slaves until then. Could you keep the records under these circumstances of slavery? So the Chassam Sofer has an interesting explanation. And he says that the Egyptians in Egypt, they kept records of their slaves to make sure they have enough slaves for whatever they need. And in their records, they recorded also the tribal belongings. And who was the ones who handled those records? Those were those princes, they were the foremen of these tribes. So they handled those records. That's what the Chassam Sofer says. So a suggestion, it says the Egyptian authorities kept records of their slaves to know the size of their available workforce, and government bureaucrats typically include names and family information in these records. So God instructed Moses to involve the princes in the census because they, as the Jewish foreman managed these records in Egypt, therefore only, it says, therefore only they could testify to each person's pedigree, and only they had access to these Egyptian records. Okay, so until now, it makes sense. But this is not everything. There is more. The Torah tells us, not only, I can understand now why these leaders were part of the census. They helped Moses to identify, to make sure that each person is who they say they are. But really, the role of the leaders, as the Torah says, was not only to be there when they were counting their own tribe, but also to be there by the counting of the other tribes as well. That raises the question, why? I can understand why they were there when they counted their own tribes, because they were the leaders and they made sure that the people of the tribe are indeed who they say they are. But why was it necessary for them to be part of the census in general? As Rashi says, when you count them, the prince of each tribe shall be with you. And it says not only the way it sounds here, but indeed it says clearly that each tribe, all of the people would be there. And the question is why? So from this, we come to a whole new understanding. A whole new understanding in what leadership is all about. Leadership is about being part. So number one, we got already the answers when we were talking about what qualifies to be a leader is not only the knowledge, not only the ability to lead, but also to be chosen by the people and to be able to see, to be a God-fearing person, to have moral values and so on. But also when the question comes that we asked, what is the job of a leader to take care for his constituents? Or is it to look at the whole overall picture, to care for the entire community as well? And from this story of the Torah that it says, that the Torah God chose these people to be leaders, and they should be part of the census. And to be part of the census was not only to be there when they counted their tribe, but to be there also when they counted all the other tribes as well. What was the purpose then? It was because they then became leaders not only of their tribes, they also became as a council of the leadership of the entire Jewish people as a whole. So when they counted the people, they were supposed to be present when they counted the other people as well. So that tells us that each prince, the fact that they were counted by both, they were standing there when they were counting their tribe as well as when they counted the other tribes. This tells us that each prince had a national role to play beyond the role that he played for his tribe. And here is what the Rebbe says. The Rebbe explains this, the reason both dimensions can be combined. We count every Jew's or tribe's individual strength, not just to highlight their uniqueness, but also because this kaleidoscope of many unique talents constitute a single complete nation. So you see, when you're talking about counting the Jewish people, you're counting the Jewish people, you're counting them as a whole, and you're counting them each tribe individually. Our sages tell us that each tribe represents a different path of serving God. There are different individuals who have different paths and different tasks and different missions in life. If you're counting a people, you have among the people, you have doctors, you have lawyers, you have all kinds of people in very high positions and positions that are very, very important positions. But in the same time, you have people with simple positions. Here the Torah teaches us that each individual is important. Not only is important as an individual, but is important because he's part of the entire people as well. Recently in Israel, there's demonstrations with those groups who want to say that some are for the reforming the justice system, some are against it. So there was groups of some of the elite people in Israel that were very much against it. Some of them, a group of the Air Force pilots, they said they're going to refuse to serve and so on. But then there was a group of people who explained that those planes that have to take off, they need people on the ground to arm the planes, to put the missiles in the planes, to make sure the planes, the machinery functions properly. Yes, maybe the person who is a pilot is more knowledgeable, is more talented, but without the other people, you don't have anything. You need to have everyone together. So here, when it comes to the Jewish people, counting them as individuals, counting each tribe as individuals, and at the same time, the leaders of the tribe standing there and being part of the counting, not only of their tribe, but counting as the other tribe as well, other tribes as well. That is to indicate how these two things come together. They're important as individuals and they're important as a collective. Says the Rebbe, we count every Jew's or tribe's individual strength, not just to highlight their uniqueness, but also because this kaleidoscope of many unique talents constitutes a single complete nation. With respect to this point, that each unique skill completes the collective, all people, irrespective of particular skill, are equal. Just as a body requires a brain to be complete, so does it require the leg. So does it require a leg. This is why everyone is counted equally as one with respect to completing the collective. All are equal. And here's the point. Here the Rebbe comes and explains why the question that we asked before. So we asked a number of questions. We asked what makes a leader, what qualifies as a good leader. And we asked why is it necessary to have the people choosing? And why is it necessary also to have the leaders being standing there when they count the other tribes as well? And finally, now to answer the other question, the final question, we asked, why was it necessary to count, to mention the names again, the names of the leaders? Before they were about to count the people, God told Moses to name those people. And we asked the question, those people were already named a month earlier when they brought the offerings. And the answer is, counting by name is an empowering, that Hashem empowers someone to a certain position. For example, we know by the story by Bezalel, who was the one who built the temple. It says, the Torah says, Re'ei karati b'shem Bezalel ben Uri. See, I called by name Bezalel ben Uri. They're calling by name, that Hashem calls by name. This is an empowering, that Hashem empowers them. And that's exactly what happened then with those leaders of the 12 leaders of the tribes. Until that point, they were just leaders of their tribes, taking care of the needs, leading them, guiding them. The leaders of the tribes, they were the ones who went in front of them wherever they went. Whenever they rested, the leaders of the tribe made sure to pull from the water of the well of Miriam. You know, there was a miraculous well that traveled with them, right? And wherever they traveled, and then they came to a place and they rested there, they camped there. So the leaders of the tribe, each one, they went and they pulled with their stick. They carved a path all the way to their camp where their tribe was camping, and that's how the water came to each tribe. They had many different roles as leaders of their tribe. But here, God appointed them to become not just the leaders of their tribe, but to become as members of the council of the leadership of the Jewish people, to become part of the census and counting the people as a whole and each individual. And as we know, the counting that God counts us represents the love that Hashem has to each and every one of us, because something you like, something you love, you count. And that's what the Rebbe explains is the reason why this was done. Says the Rebbe in the next text. Says the Rebbe, this explains why God named all the princes again. He named the princes of the tribes. We learned earlier the notion that God appoints and empowers people by proclaiming the name. As it is written, see, I have called Bezalel by name, and I have imbued him with the Spirit of God. Says the Rebbe, a similar phenomenon occurs in our case. By identifying each prince by name, God appointed them to a new position that they did not enjoy before. They now became leaders that the nations would call upon for every important matter. As Rashi says. This also explains why Moses and Aaron took those who were indicated by name, that the Torah says, that are indicated by name, inasmuch as they were appointed to a new position, to be called upon by the nation for all important matters. In addition to their former position as tribal princes, they needed to be drafted by name once again. These are the points, what we learn from the lessons. This year is a year of Hakel, a year of gathering. And in the year of Hakel, the Rebbe always said, we should gather together, people together from different communities. And indeed, we had in the Chabaras, in different homes, we had different gatherings of Hakel. We'll have more Bezrat Hashem, God willing. One of the things we do every year is also we get together, and the holiday of Shavuos that is coming up in 9 days. And we get together in the holiday of Shavuos, a number of different shuls here in Sheepshead Bay, different rabbis, the people in the community. And this is a perfect example of the concept, the idea that the togetherness, we are together. We are responsible for one another. Of course, each person, each rabbi, each leader is concerned with their constituents, the good of their community. But we get together and we look as a whole that Hashem commanded us to be together, to get together and to care for one another, to make sure that the other community has their needs also fulfilled as well as we care for our own community. That is the beautiful thing and the beautiful meaning of the Jewish leaders. A Jewish leader cares for their own constituents and cares for the community as a whole. So may Hashem help that very soon we shall be led by the true leader, with the Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, should lead us all out from Galus and bring us all to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash. And there it will be the real Hakel, the real gathering of all the Am Yisrael together. Thank you for joining. And for the Tanya class as well.